In his new memoir, The Ride of a Lifetime, Lessons Learned from 15 Years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company, Bob Iger talks transparently and honestly about the acquisition of Star Wars and how George Lucas reacted to some of it. And I'm going to briefly talk about a couple sentences here, like every other dipshit on the internet. We all report on another person's report of a report of a report. You gotta love the internet, man. Disney, in its purchase of Lucasfilm, also purchased 3 outlines from Lucas himself for 3 new Star Wars movies. Iger says, quote, "We decided we needed to buy them, though we made it clear in the purchase agreement that we would not be contractually obligated to adhere to the plot lines he'd laid out." Close quote. And that makes sense. If you're buying a thing, if you're dumping a whole shitload of money into acquiring a thing, you don't want your hands tied, right? That's not an outlandish thing to say, right? If your business is creativity, you don't want to have creative shackles on, even if those shackles are from a revolutionary, visionary movie deity filmmaking director. And let's face it, the prequels were not loved, at least not openly on a visible scale in the early 2010s. That's a relatively new phenomenon. I started this channel in 2011, and goddamn, you would have to sift through YouTube with a magnifying glass to find a handful of positive prequel comments back then. But over the past 8 years, that's changed quite a bit. And I think the reason behind that, at least what makes sense to me for this sudden shift, as I sit here watching the fandom over the past 8 years of being on this YouTube thing, what makes sense to me is that a lot of the prequel and Clone Wars fans who grew up with that stuff being their Star Wars, now are old enough to hop on the internet and defend what they love. But almost 8 years ago when Disney acquired the franchise, I'm sure they had no intentions of ever using Lucas's outlines. Which makes sense when we gaze through the time machine. The prequels were way more disliked on a massive public scale than this generation of Star Wars. Not even a fucking contest. So from Disney's perspective, from a business perspective, from the temperature in the room, it made complete sense. Iger goes on to say, quote, "George felt betrayed, and while this process would never have been easy for him, we'd gotten off to an unnecessarily rocky start." Close quote. Iger's right about one thing. This whole process would never have been easy for Lucas, right? Can you imagine being a part of something, owning something, creating a world, and being in charge of that world for 3.5 decades, and then you make the decision to sell it? It must be tough. Obviously, the decision was his to sell. He made the decision. It was time for him to let go. I'm sure it was all taking a huge toll on him. We know for a fact through numerous quotes where he talked about fans being upset. There's no question that it got to him. And honestly, it was probably a pretty healthy decision. Loosening the grip, letting go, a sigh of relief. But who knows? I'm sure it will never go out of his mind. I'm sure he will always think about what could have been. We all have those thoughts, right? But the sale and acquisition and letting go of this thing that was his baby for almost 4 decades, no matter what happened, would have never been easy. The memoir goes on to say, quote, "Lucas didn't hide his disappointment, saying that Lucas said there was nothing new about the sequel," which is without a doubt the biggest complaint about The Force Awakens. The most common complaint that I've seen directed at the movie. It's certainly the safest Star Wars movie ever made, right? One that rides on the wake of nostalgia and kind of feeds that same wake back into itself. Not really introducing anything extraordinarily new, which is a factor that I've complained about numerous times, while at the same time stating over and over again that I thoroughly enjoy The Force Awakens. It's incredibly fun. It was a good way to bring some much needed excitement, revitalize the franchise. So yeah, those couple sentences or words even are what's making their rounds on the internet today as far as I can tell. And it's really nothing new. We've heard Lucas talk openly about his feelings on The Force Awakens especially during an interview with Charlie Rose. And this was back in 2015, late 2015, after The Force Awakens had already come out. In this interview, Lucas said, quote, "They looked at the stories and they said, we want to make something for the fans. They decided they didn't want to use those stories. They decided they were going to do their own thing, Lucas explained. They weren't keen to have me involved anyway, but if I get in there, I'm just going to cause trouble because they're not going to do what I want them to do. And I don't have the control to do that anymore. And all I would do is muck everything up. And so I said, okay, I will go my way and I'll let them go their way. Close quote. Not everything is breaking news, as salacious as it might seem to certain people who want to make it salacious news, right? Lucas goes on to say, quote, they wanted to do a retro movie. I don't like that. Every movie I work very hard to make them completely different, with different planets, with different spaceships. Make it new. Close quote. And that's just one example of one interview. And yeah, it does suck for Lucas, right? But at the same time, looking at the harsh reality of a business sale, it's what's in the writing. Oh, and if we're talking about things that Lucas didn't like, check out his thoughts on the EU. The idea that he loved the EU or even was involved with much of the EU is some weird narrative spin. Check it out sometime. This isn't the first time George Lucas hasn't liked a thing in Star Wars that he didn't make. And do I wish Lucas was involved a little bit more in the sequel trilogy or future Star Wars movies? Yeah, I do. I do. Despite my grunts and groans about the prequel trilogy, there was a spark of creativity that you could see there. There was a different feel. Even though that feeling never really hit me the way it was intended, I do appreciate the chances, the world building, the attempt at presenting something different. I've always said that I would rather have a filmmaker have full creative control and make the thing that they want to make, and maybe me be disappointed, than having something that's basically canned tuna that's the same shit every single time you open it, right? And I still believe that. But sometimes the excitement of a thing trumps that sentiment. Sometimes. Anyway, guys, I felt like hopping on the microphone and talking about what everybody else is talking about without a huge overarching narrative to spin. It's nothing new. And honestly, it's pretty neat to see Bob Iger be this open about it. And when I say this open, it's literally like a couple words. And like every great YouTuber, I'm just reporting on a couple sentences that somebody else reported on. I'm just taking a couple words from a website from somebody else that read the book and making my own video about it. And like every great YouTuber, I don't have any intention of reading the book. I don't have time for that. I gotta pump out videos. I gotta make a video a day. Books. I'm just here to skim articles and take a couple sentences out. I'm an intellectual. Don't forget to like and subscribe.